Hey, welcome to a brand new series we're starting today called Dreams and Detours. It's from the life of Joseph, and I'm glad you're here with us. I want to welcome our Coweta campus, our Sapulpa campus, those of you that are watching online. Glad to have you aboard with us on this. If you got a Bible that you can open up or a Bible you can power up, would you get to Genesis 37? The book is Genesis, the chapter is 37. Genesis is the opening book of the Bible. So we're at the very beginning. In fact, in my Bible, I'm on page 45. So we're right up here early. Should be easy to find for you, and we're going to jump right into it. So help me out here. You'll need to finish this statement. The shortest distance between 2 points is, a straight line. Exactly. It's a straight line. It's true, isn't it? The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. We just know that from, your geometry class or whatever. It's true. The shortest distance is that. Well, unless you live in Tulsa in the summertime, then the shortest distance between 2 points is under construction. So early in life, we think we can control our destinies, right? We think we can be whatever we want to be. We can choose our own path. We can go our own way. We're kind of taught that. That really is the American dream, right? And so we chart a course. We start making our way down that course, and then often there is heartache, and sometimes there's disappointment. Instead of a straight line, our life often resembles something more like a road improvement project with multiple detours. Maybe basketball was your life, but then you didn't make the team. Or maybe you were headed towards a wedding and your fiance broke it off. Or maybe your job was a perfect fit. You loved it until you were laid off. Maybe your financial future was coming together until the unexpected surgery. That's really going to be the case with a guy that we're going to look at named Joseph. We're going to find his story beginning there in Genesis 37. The shortest distance between 2 points when it came to him and the dreams that he had was really a series of detours. And maybe like him, you feel like God has given you a dream, has a plan for you to do something, has something laid out there. Maybe it's a career that you think God has directed you toward. Or maybe it's a social injustice that you think you're supposed to do something about. Maybe it's a ministry that God is tapping you on the shoulder with. And those dreams often come with some unexpected twists and undesired turns, some detours. When that happens, what can result is it can feel like your dream is dying. It's easy to lose passion. It's easy to lose some of the energy that you had to pursue that, because we have this picture in our mind of how things should be. And when things don't match up with our picture, then we get disappointed, and sometimes that leads to being discouraged and even disillusioned. We had our plan. We maybe had a time frame. We had a preferred path, and sometimes that's the reason there's an issue. Sometimes it's because it's all ours and it has little to do with what God has in mind. Let me just kind of give us some things to just help us start out here. God's plan is often different than how we picture it. I mean, we have this idea in mind. We think this ought to be the way it is, and so we plan it out. We think it through. We write down all the business plan and everything. And oftentimes God's plan is going to look different than maybe how we picture it. And often God's plan, it usually takes longer than what we expect. I mean, we don't want to wait. We've got things that we want to see happen, and we get in a hurry, and we don't like to take the time that it often takes. And so for us, as we get through this process and we get on this maybe extended detour, it doesn't make sense to us, and sometimes we begin to question God, and we begin to question ourselves, and we begin to question the dream. And in the story of Joseph, we find that God ultimately develops a future role, but it's through a series of detours that finally is going to make sense once we get to chapter 45 of Genesis, but it's through the detours. It's not in spite of them. It's not after them. It's through the detours that things finally begin to start making sense for Joseph. Let's jump into his story. It is a pretty twisted one to begin with, and you need to know a little bit of the family history. He comes from a pretty dysfunctional family. In fact, in his family tree is a lot of deception. In fact, it's just a couple of chapters before that we read about his father, Jacob, Joseph's father, Jacob, deceiving his own father, who was Isaac. Remember the story of Jacob deceiving his father, dressing up as the older son, and basically stealing the blessing away from the older son, Esau. Not only true on his father's side, but something similar happened on his mother's side. Joseph's mother, Rachel, deceived her father. His name was Laban, and she did that by stealing the household idols. When finally Jacob and her are released and are traveling back to Jacob's home country, and then she refuses to reveal that she has them to her father. So you've got deception there. There's polygamy. Jacob's father has has children with 4 different moms. I mean, this is an issue right there. There's abduction and rape. There's revenge and murder. There's incest. I mean, you thought your family came with a lot of baggage. That's the family environment that Joseph grew up in. And if that's not bad enough, Joseph's mother, Rachel, dies when he's 10 while she's giving birth to his younger brother. So it's in that context then that we have this guy, and immediately things begin to go south for him, or at least early on in life. We find out that Joseph is his father's favorite, which causes a lot of issue within the family. Genesis 37, verse 3 and 4. Now Israel, by the way, that is the same term for Jacob. Okay, same guy right here, just God changed his name. Now Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and probably we could say had been born to his favorite person, his favorite wife, and he made an ornate robe for him. So not only does he favor him, but he shows it demonstrably by creating this coat or this robe, this coat of many colors, maybe you've heard it called. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So it creates all kinds of sibling jealousy and rivalry because the father shows his favoritism to his son Joseph. Joseph is the recipient of that. Doesn't help, just the verse before, Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, so his half-brothers, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. And so we don't know the nature of that. We don't know if he's just being a tattletale or what, but, occasionally things were not good there, so that doesn't help. Now, you throw in those two things and add this, verse 5, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. So you can read what the dream's about in the next few verses. Basically, he and his brothers are out harvesting grain, and what happens is all the other brothers, their sheaves of grains came over to Joseph's sheaf of grain and bowed down to it. And so, there was this picture of being subservient. Joseph tells another dream that he had immediately after that the sun, the moon, the 11 stars, apparently signifying all of his family, they bowed down to me, he said. Now, Joseph may not have known what all was meant by the dreams that he has, but certainly he knew that it meant that he would lead in some capacity, that God had some preferred future for him, that God had something in store for him. But it doesn't settle well with people. Verse 11, his brothers were jealous of him. We already heard they hated him all the more. But listen, after that last dream, his father kept these things in mind. So Joseph was hated. He was envied by his brother. And one day, Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers who were out taking care of the flocks of sheep. They were out grazing them. Eventually, Joseph is going to locate them. Joseph went after his brothers, found them near Dothan. But then when they saw him in the distance and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. We see the intensity of this hatred and envy. Here comes the dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. And so they have this idea that maybe they can take care of their problem. So Joseph has these dreams. He's the favorite, and the brothers think that they can take care of him. In fact, that probably just reminds us that for anybody that has a plan, that has a dream, that thinks about a future, there will always be those who are opposed to your dreams. There will always be those who will fight against it. We can't expect it to be easy. In fact, we need to expect resistance. There will always be somebody that's against the things that we are looking forward to. That's the case with Joseph's brother. They see him coming, they begin to plot, and they say, let's throw him into this cistern. Now, a cistern in those days was basically a hole dug in the ground, and it was lined with plaster, and because of the arid conditions, it would hold water when water wasn't to be found. It just so happens now that there's not water in there, and when there wasn't water in the cisterns, often they were used to imprison people or to, put somebody where you didn't want anybody to find them. Just a side note to those of you that are living with siblings, just to be cautious about how you treat your siblings. That's the case right here. So that's their plan. Well, Judah gets a little nervous about it. They begin to see a caravan of traders that are coming through. And so he says to his brother, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. That's the caravan of traders that are coming by. And let's not lay our hands upon him. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern. They sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. And so we see Joseph now sold by his own brothers, by his own family, even though there was nothing that he did to deserve that. Now, Joseph may not have been the wisest, telling the dreams in which he did, maybe, telling on his brothers. That may not have been the smartest thing for him to do, but we're going to give him a break. He's 17 years old. We probably weren't responsible for doing the wisest things at that age either. And so he's been sold. Now he is headed to a life of slavery. So that's the situation that we're in. And basically, you got to ask yourself the question, is that the life a person gets for doing the right thing? I mean, is this what we get for doing the right things? Where is God in all of this? Why is God allowing this to happen to Joseph? It's not fair. It doesn't seem like it fits. And so sometimes when we deal with things like that, it can cause us to think that our dreams will never happen. Joseph had to have wondered that as all of this is taking place. What about, God, all the dreams that you have for me? What about the things that you've revealed to me? And so when we're on this detour of disappointment, when it seems like we've gotten off track when it comes to our dreams, one of the good things for us just to keep in mind is this simple phrase right here: it could be worse. It could be worse. Maybe you've thought that before. Maybe you've walked through that with different situations. Thought, well, I could be dealing with this, so it could be worse. I'm glad it's not any worse than what my situation is. What do you do when you find yourself on the detour of disappointment and you're not getting anywhere near the dreams and plans that you had? Well, one of the things is to say that it could be worse, because what that does is it causes us to keep things in perspective. It helps us to bring things back to reality, because often we look at something, we think it's done, it's over, it's never going to happen, it's never going to work, and we exaggerate how difficult things are. It could be worse helps us to get the right perspective. In fact, that's honestly the case here in Joseph's life. His brothers were about to kill him. It could have been much worse. It could have been much worse. And so it's something that I say to myself often. I have to kind of recalibrate when difficulties are happening in my life that, it could be worse. And so when you're leaving church today and you walk out in the parking lot and you're passing all the fancy cars and the, really, really nice pickup trucks and the, convertible, and you walk away past all the rest of them to your little car, and you have to pull out the key because you don't have the remote entry, and you have to put the key in yourself and open up, and you're thinking to yourself, man, I wish I had a new vehicle. Then one of the things that you could say it with me, is it could be worse, right? And when you're going home and, you go in the front of the neighborhood and it's got some of the fancier houses there with a whole lot more square footage than you have, and that one that's got the really nice swimming pool and the backyard kitchen and all of that, and you're thinking, man, if I had that, I'd be happy. If I had a place like that, then I would be really happy. And as you're opening the door to your little place, you can say, it could be worse. Or maybe as you're getting ready for bed tonight, as you're kind of, changing clothes there in the bathroom or wherever you do that, you accidentally, though, make the mistake of looking at yourself sideways in the mirror, and you're thinking to yourself, man, I wish I had his muscles, or I wish I had her figure, or whatever it is. And, instead, you say to yourself, it could be worse. And tomorrow morning when you wake up and you roll over and you look across the pillow and don't even go there, don't say that. The problem is we like to compare ourselves with others, especially those who have it better. We look at that and we think, man, I want that. But the honest truth is that things could be a lot worse. And sometimes that just helps us to have a proper perspective. It could be worse. So back to our story, the brothers take Joseph's coat, the one that his father had made special for him, and they put some blood all over it, and they take it back to the father, and of course he assumes the worst, and the brothers kind of just push that narrative, and he begins the grieving process, and the brothers think they've taken care of all their problems, and they're not going to have to deal with that brother anymore. But meanwhile, the story with Joseph continues. We're going to skip all the way to chapter 39. We've gone through most of chapter 37. Chapter 38 takes an interlude and tells us another bit of the story of dysfunction within this family, but the narrative jumps all the way to chapter 39 that we're on. And verse 1 says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. So the caravan of traders had come through, and they'd sold Joseph to it, and they had taken him down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. So now Joseph finds himself in a foreign country. He's far, far, far from home. There's a different language that's spoken. There are different cultures that are being observed there. Now, he's nowhere close to his dream, and now he's a slave. I mean, it's a reality. He's not just traveling, having been bought. Now he has been sold actually into slavery. But I want you to see this glimmer of hope we see in verse 1. We read about a guy named Potiphar, and it's one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So Joseph has not just been sold into any slavery. He's not just any slave, but he's a slave to the captain of the palace where Pharaoh himself lives. And what we're going to begin to see from that is that God is not done with Joseph. It's just kind of a hint for us that God's still doing something, that we can't place a period where God has simply placed a comma. Slavery is not going to be what defines Joseph's life. It's going to be a part of it for a short while. But during that while, he's disappointed. He's going to be disappointed. In fact, we all are going to experience disappointment. Might be emotionally, might be relationally, might be financially, it might even be spiritually that we deal with disappointment. But like Joseph, we don't throw in the towel. We don't think God's done with us. We keep looking to what God is up to. We keep hope alive. Now, at this point in Joseph's life, his brothers have betrayed him. His father thinks that he's dead. It seems everyone has forgotten him. And here's the big question. Has God forgotten him? I mean, everyone else has, but has God forgotten him? And some of you are wondering the same thing. Has God forgotten me? You're on one of those detours of disappointment. You thought things were headed that way. You were on the fast track, and now here you are, and you're asking the question, God, do you remember me? God, have you forgotten me? Here's what I love about what God's word tells us in just the very next verse. Sold into slavery, the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. I mean, that's amazing. When things look bleak, when they look at their worst. I mean, it couldn't get any worse. He couldn't get any farther away from home. And here he is. Could it get any worse? Nope. The Lord was with Joseph. In fact, not just one time, but 4 times in chapter 39, we hear those words. The Lord was with him, or the Lord was with Joseph. 2 times while he's living in slavery under the house of Potiphar. A couple of times later in the chapter when things do get worse, when he is actually in prison. And it says there again, the Lord is with him, and it said, and caused him to be successful. It's as if the writer of this story knew that as we were reading it, we were going to be wondering, is God still with him? Because when we look at the story, it sure doesn't feel like God is with him. That's a reminder for us that we can't determine God's presence by circumstances. We can't determine God's presence by the current situation. It's as if the writer's going, listen, I just need you to know, it may not look like it, but the Lord is with him. So another good thing for you to remember and a good thing for you to say when you're on that detour of disappointment is just to say to yourself, God is with me. I need to hear it. God is with me. When you're dealing with the hurt, dealing with the situation, when it doesn't seem like you're getting any closer to your dreams, God is with me. He's present. He's at work. Even while Joseph is a slave, God is giving purpose and meaning even in that environment. And so we've just got to keep telling ourselves the truth. God is with me. Because you have an enemy that's trying to tell you the opposite. That God has forgotten you, that God has abandoned you, that what you're going through right now, that's not a part of God's plan. You've somehow missed it. Those dreams weren't real. And so we keep telling ourselves, God is with me. God is with me. And did you catch it there at the next line of verse 2, chapter 39? The Lord is with Joseph so that he prospered. It's interesting terminology, isn't it? I mean, most of us would assume that prosperity would mean getting out of slavery. If God was with Joseph, then he should have been pardoned from slavery. He should have been issued an apology. He should have been escorted home. His brothers should have been punished publicly. That's what would happen if God is with him. But here's what we're learning from Joseph's story is that while God is with us, God is also more concerned with what's happening in us than he is what's happening just to us. That God's more interested in what's happening in us than he is to what's happening to us. See, what's happening to us causes something to happen in us. Because what we see is that God is not only with Joseph, but he is at work the entire time. It seems that God wasn't with him, but in fact, it was a part of the plan all along, that God was using what was happening to him for something that was going to happen in the future, that God was doing something in him while things were happening to him. And so something that Joseph must have been telling himself that I think we can tell ourselves as well when we're dealing with disappointment is that God will work it out. That God's somehow going to work it out. Now, it may not feel like it sometimes, but God's going to work it out. It may be different than how I pictured it, but God's going to work it out. It may take longer than what I had hoped or had expected, but God will work it out. In fact, we read that text just a couple of weeks ago in Romans 8:28. We know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. And it's like Joseph has some understanding of that, which allows him to get through these difficult, disappointing times, that God will work things out. And that explains how he was faithful even as a slave. We'll talk even more about his faithfulness and obedience next week. And so we need to remind ourselves, God will work it out. And one of the questions of God will work it out is, how's God going to work it out? And that's often something that we really can't tell till after the fact. We'll see how God will work out some of these things for Joseph later, but maybe one of the more pressing questions for us is, I want to know when God's going to work it out. I don't care how he does it. I want to know, when is God going to take care of this? When is it going to be over? When am I going to have to quit waiting? And again, some of that just goes back to us having to trust God's timing. We're not very good at waiting. And that's one of the things that God is working on Joseph right now. He's 17 years of age. He's going to be 30-something when he is actually released from prison. And Joseph will have no choice. He's going to be just waiting. There's nothing that he can do. He's going to have to trust God's timing. What God does do is that he takes all of the disappointment, and he takes all the broken pieces, and he takes all the dysfunction, and he says, I can work with that, and I can accomplish something with that for my purpose, for Joseph's good and for God's glory. And so he redeems. In fact, God can redeem anything. And so we don't give up on God redeeming our story. That's who he is. That's what he does. He can redeem anything. It's never too late. You're never too far down the detour. It's never too far gone. It's never too broken. And ultimately, all of this story that we've been talking about today from Joseph's life, ultimately it's pointing us to Jesus, who is our great Redeemer, who, by the way, will redeem the world from its greatest disappointment, its sin, its rebellion against God. And what God is going to do, what we'll see God's going to do in Joseph's life, is God will build his people in Egypt, where Joseph's at now. He'll build his nation, his family, the Israelites, to 1 million+ people. God will protect his people from famine. God will protect the integrity of his people, because while they're there, it's going to be set up in such a way that they're not going to intermarry. And God is planning all of this, and the suffering and the disappointment of Joseph is a part of this, and God's planning in advance to save many and ultimately bring about a Savior named Jesus. And in the meantime, God's going to bless Joseph as well. So maybe God is using disappointment to shape your story. Maybe God is using some things that don't make sense right now to shape your preferred future. Maybe God is using some things that are seemingly insignificant right now, not even on your radar, but is using them to do something big. And so what we learn from Joseph is to trust God in spite of disappointments. And like Joseph, you'll find that God's trustworthy. He's not forgotten you. He's not abandoned you. But when we find it, when we feel it, when it seems like that disappointment's there, we remember it could be worse. And we remember God's with me. And we remember God will work it out. See, we can't choose the direction of our life. We can't choose what that's going to look like, but we can choose how we handle the disappointment of life. We don't get to choose everything that happens in life. We don't know all the circumstances that we're going to have to experience, but we do know that God works for good for those who love him and who live for him. And right now, the word for you may be disappointment, but Joseph's story reminds us that God always gets the last word. Pray with me. Father, thank you for teaching us and reminding us today of dealing with the disappointments of life, just like Joseph experienced, just like he thought he was distracted and off course, and yet, God, you're at work behind the scenes, maneuvering and orchestrating things for your good purposes and your good will. And Jacob ultimately is going to be blessed by it as well. Father, we're thankful for those reminders that things could be worse. We're thankful, Father, for that perspective, that you are you are with us, whether it feels like it, looks like it, whether the circumstances say that or not, that you are with us, and that, God, we are thankful that you will work it out for our behalf. Either this side of heaven or on the other side of heaven, that you will work it out. We're grateful for that. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.